Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Small Soldiers. Everything else is just a toy. So, this movie was actually really fun. We would, of course, have to realize that there are probably so many other projects that have become like action figures come alive. You have like Night at Museum, you'd have Making Contact, Indian in the Cupboard, and a lot of just me wanting to compare Small Soldiers to Child's Play, along with just kind of several other things that at some point I will probably realize I'd completely forgotten about talking about within this review of like, oh yeah, this action figure thing was to have been a come to life kind of kind of tale. But so we'd have Small Soldiers, and I like the fact that they go from the very beginning of how like these action figures were to have come to be to eventually their uh journey into like, well, hey, like these things are to be forced to combat one another and nothing else matters. And then all of a sudden, like the further and further we go into this story, the more that like the commandos and the Gorgonites, like how heavily choosing of sides that just kind of becomes in this story, to where if it seems at all that a other person is to come into play and is to at all whatsoever just come into conflict with the commando elite getting to the Gorgonites, like really, like it just becomes that the commandos are to just see them as any kind of threat, even though really it's just all like, hey man, like I'm just caught in the middle here, and like I'm just wanting to go on and just sell some toys or just make a buck off of you, sadly enough. Uh, so this to me was a lot of fun. I didn't realize that Kirsten Dunst was also in this film because I had just gone on and reviewed the original Jumanji film, and coincidentally, I just decided to just check this movie out, and Kirsten Dunst was in it. I'm like, man, am I gonna just watch every movie that Kirsten Dunst is in? Like, should I rewatch Spider Man again? But it was all just kind of like a coincidence. But I had also really just gone into this movie because it felt just like a fun idea. And really, I wish at some point that this would go on and kind of be re explored. Maybe not in the exact same way that this movie does, but I feel that it's a fun enough concept. So there also is quite a bit, I guess, of real gremlin, either little Easter egg things or just actors who had prior gone on to be in the Gremlins films that are also here. So I thought that that was kind of rather interesting to see this movie kind of play out the way it does. You're just gonna be like, oh yeah, like he was in Gremlins 1 and 2. Oh yeah, like he was in the second one. Oh yeah, like they say the word gizmo. Ah, isn't that wonderful? And wanting to have me want to like compare this to Gremlins because it's eventually like having uh like a fight against kind of two Gizmo slash Gremlin uh things, but then again, like most of the time, like the Gremlins in the later half of the film are just kind of having fun, and then eventually they see like a threat amongst them and play it out in that journey of way of needing a more action packed film. It was also kind of surprising to go through the cast list of just kind of voice characters. We would, of course, have Tommy Lee Jones playing the main villainous character in here, but then also we'd come to find in the cast list like Sarah Michelle Gellar is also playing like the Barbie characters, and we'd also just kind of come to find just actors that were really just surprised they're actually in this film, like Phil Hartman, or eventually just kind of seeing certain characters where you can understand, like, oh, I can understand them going from this to being in stuff like Transformers because they're kind of playing the same character. And that, of course, would be like characters like Alan's dad, where I can immediately understand like where he goes from this to like the Transformers movie, because he's kind of playing the same vein of character, the fatherish character. So we'd also have the title of this toy store called The Inner Child, and that just seemed very weird to me. But also thinking about it, more than likely that title, like they really had to narrow down, like, because there are even still to that time probably a litany of different kind of toy store names. So they probably did not want to go on and take a real name that probably would have been a legitimate name for a toy store at that time. But Inner Child just seems very weird. Like I would have much rather had a toy store probably be called That Figures, or uh, Recollect Your Childhood, or something like that. But the My Inner Child just seems kind of very bizarre. Um, but then also we would come to find that Alan, who is to kind of be the middleman of this whole story between the Gorgonites and the Commando Elites, like he's going on and like realizing how much this store is to not be the right way to sell product to anybody. So he's just kind of forced to take things in his own hands and get these commandos and these Gorgonites to try to figure out how to have his store make profit, because nobody's really coming into this store and really wanting to uh, spend any money just because of how outdated it really is, sadly enough. So this movie I thought was so entertaining, even though at certain points you are kind of having at a point of like certain characters kind of going into a scene, kind of looking and reacting at some kind of chaos rather than us actually seeing the figures uh, playing themselves out. And really also like we have to realize that this is to be kind of like just stop motion, and really I feel that a lot of the stuff that they do here still holds up. I didn't feel there was at any point where I'd kind of look at one thing and immediately have it just kind of stick out in the film to just be like, oh, like that, like that, obviously that effect, ugh, like that was the worst of the film. Like it still all holds up. It's still really good quality of film. And this story is really eventually just interesting enough to have me quite easily say that this movie was great. Double thumbs up. Really did enjoy it. And also, I feel that this movie is to probably be the easiest thing to have gone on and at some point gotten remade, but it didn't. Um, but yeah, like great all around. Really a lot of fun to watch. And so yeah, like I don't know if I can go on and much tee up this movie. It's pretty straightforward. We really just have kind of like how I set up, where we would have Alan, who is just kind of desperate to get his father's store to start making money. And he is to go on and talk to this delivery truck driver to try and get this action figure set to just, hey man, can I have this? Like, can you just kind of pretend that you kind of lost this shipment so I can get it and I can uh, try and make some money off it? And the delivery guy's like, yeah, sure, yeah, all right, because they've been kind of long-winded friends for a good time. So eventually we would find the creators of said action figures had just gone on and decided to just find any microchip that it seems is to have been smart enough, but it ends up being that the microchip is far too smart. It's, to me, a military grade intelligent microchip that is to eventually start to think for its own and strategize and otherwise lead to chaos. But like all of these people at first were to just try and figure out how to make a buck, and man, does that blow up in their faces, literally. So eventually it comes to having Alan realize that the toys are wreaking havoc on his store, and calling up the uh, the toy company that is otherwise tied to these action figures. And then the developers are just like, oh well, like, yeah, like I guess we didn't really know what we were getting into. And so the developers like make their way to Alan's place, and by then, like, there is to be a war brewing, and we would come to find our main commander elite, who I believe is Chip. I eventually will go on and have a full blown cast list and whatever within full on spoilers. But yeah, we'll come to find out that the Commandos Elite will eventually come into figuring out other ways to be able to kind of kick this all off or continue the fight, as they are to eventually come into like tying in Barbies to their ranks, and tying in uh, other stores that are to go on and have the same similar action figures, and just kind of tie that into the third act. But yeah, so really it goes on to be a very I feel clever enough film, and also like with all that they accomplished in this movie with stop motion and all the things that they went on and did. It's like, man, this movie is very detailed. So with that said, yeah, this movie is great. I enjoyed it. Where can you go on and say you can see Small Soldiers, unless it's to easily be available on some app service, of which that I am to not even go on and state here, because heaven forbid I go on and look that up. Uh, right now you can go on and find an app, hopefully on a Google Play Store, called Zelifonic, Zelivonic. There are probably also other apps that you can dare, in fact, hopefully find on a Google Play Store, or eventually you could also just go into Google and search a APK download for them, which of course to be stuff like Manic, Mannic, and there is to also be a Google search APK download for a app called HDO Box, which really goes on and sees a wider variety of movies and shows that eventually you don't even know even really still exist. Uh, just these random assortment of just shows and movies that you're like, oh my god, I can watch this now? All right. Like, I didn't even know I could watch a thing like this somewhere. Because yeah, like that's the real like annoyance of like assuming that you could pretty much watch everything on streaming, but then again, like you further and further go into it and realize that it's like, well, like I can't find this movie, and like I looked up that one, and I tried to find like this because it has a trailer of it. Where can I go on and I can find this said thing? And then yeah, like that's the whole journey in figuring out that eventually I had gone on to obtain. So with that said, I think since I've talked about this whole movie long enough, as far as a non-spoilerish cryptic like stuff is really concerned, let's go on and let's fully get into real deep dish action spoilers. When I'm to go on and talk about every bit of what is to entail for this movie, from whatever is to come up within my brain or whatever is to be listed within the cast list that is to be up on my phone. So with that said, I think it is about that time yet again to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie and pause this video, get out my cast list, and go on and talk about the detailed nitty gritty of this movie. Alright, spoilers. So, in the very beginning of this, we would have this kind of Globo Tech whatever company that is to be owning these action figures because they are developing them, making them, slapping packaging on them, and shipping them out to some location. But before all that, we would of course have somebody come up with the idea of these action figures somewhere. So we'd have both Larry and Irwin, who are to be these kind of pitchmen, these kind of guys who pitch ideas to whoever is to be seemingly the new owner of this company. So Irwin and Larry are making their way into this kind of big kind of table setup to eventually pitch this idea to Gil Mars, who is Dennis Leary in this film, which I'm like, oh man, we have Dennis Leary in this film? Like, this is going to be great. I always like a lot of Dennis Leary films, regardless of eventually how they all play out at the end. But I always like a Dennis Leary film. So Irwin and Larry make their way to this assistant who is Miss Keeble or Kegel. So the two of these men make their way to meeting up with this assistant to make their way to this boardroom and go on to at first have Irwin start to pitch the Gorgonites. He's going on and he's talking about how these monstrous characters are to have this location called Gorgon, making, of course, people supposedly want to go in and do some research to find out if Gorgon is to really exist. And Mars is going on and hearing this pitch about the Gorgonites, and he's just like, like, you're making people learn, you're making people research, like that's just kind of going on and sitting like, hey, like, look at so and so's other video instead of going into mine, and kind of learn other things besides playing with our action figure. And eventually Mars is to just be like, no, next pitch, come on, give me something else. So Larry comes in and is to have this whole action figure with seemingly its kind of background statue-ish like setup to showcase to Mars, and Mars is like, all right, well, like, and Larry is to go on and put this whole kind of PowerPoint commercial presentation behind them, and Mars is looking at this, and it's like, like, this action figure kind of punches through the packaging, and like, why aren't we just having our action figures just do that? Like, why can't our action figures be smart enough to, like, be able to move on their own, play on their own, have their own thing about them, and then have our kids just kind of watch as this whole thing plays out? Come to find out, they make these action figures really effing expensive. Like, the action figures are like $79.95 or something like that. I'm like, holy crap! Why would you want to go on and sell this action figure for that high of a price? But then again, I'm thinking like, well, like I guess there'd be maybe a market, like, if you were to have gone on and really just bought like one of these things. But anyways, so like, I guess if there was like enough commercialization of it, it just is to be all what it is. So Mars goes on and is to have his own kind of spin, his own kind of pitch, and the two guys are just like, well, like obviously we're gonna do what he wants. Like that's actually a kind of a genius idea, anyways. So they run with it. So Irvin and Larry are to go on to realize that they need to go on and come up with this idea, and Miss Kegel is going on and giving them password codes to kind of get into their computers. And come to find out, one of the passwords is actually Gizmo, and Irwin is to look at his password and immediately spouts out what exactly it is. And so Miss Kegel is just like, you moron! Like it's not a password anymore if you blurt it out. So Larry, late at night, kind of just chiming away at his keyboard, is to eventually need to go into his access of going into the computer to try to find seemingly some microchips, and he doesn't remember his password whatsoever. So he's just like, my password is Gizmo. I'm going to steal my other associate's password. I'm just going to use that because I don't remember mine. So Larry goes in to type his password. It works. Access granted. And is to start thumbing through microchips as well as probably a number of other things. Maybe he's going through online. Maybe he's going through some videos. Maybe he's going through some X brand stuff. Who knows? But anyways, Larry is to go on and thumb through his findings of microchips, and he's to just go on and just be like, well, like smart microchips, really smart microchips, surpluses, and whatever. I need all the microchips. Give me all of them. So that then goes on to some bit of time later to have all these toys, get these packaging, get seemingly a run of product to eventually go out. And that is to, of course, have our delivery man named Joe, who is, of course, delivering these packages. So we then would turn around and have a toy store called The Inner Child that is to really just have a lot of people be walking out than going in. And we would eventually come to find that Alan is needing to kind of work or man this toy store alone because his dad is to be at this conference to eventually want to figure out how he can become better at selling a toy store. And Alan is to kind of give Joe the joke of like, well, like if anything, I think the real strategy is just to burn it all down for insurance money, because like there's nothing else that we're gonna be able to like rekindle into this store to get everybody to come on in and buy things. So Alan goes on to be talking to the delivery man and is to realize that these action figures are coming in. And so he's like, well, like, how about I go on and I take these action figures and you just kind of lose this paperwork? And Joe is like, okay, all right, like as long as I can kind of figure out how to do all that, and you be able to make some money off this and kind of have a turnaround, then yeah, like I'm willing. So Alan goes on and takes the action figures, and so Alan himself is to take two of the action figures out of the case, which is to be both Archer and both Chip Hazard. So Alan goes on to start playing with these action figures himself to just kind of see how they work and how they move and how they whatever. So Alan goes in the back room and is to start kind of looking at these characters up and down, and is to start by giving them the coded message to get them to seemingly turn on. And so Alan starts doing that, but then is to hear the rustling and bustling of both Christy and Timmy making their way to the store. Timmy, it seems, is having an upcoming birthday, and so Christy is just kind of there to kind of follow in Timmy to at some point try to figure out like what he should get for his birthday. It is kind of funny that Christy here is to eventually be like the girlfriend boyfriend of eventually Alan, but Christy is kind of playing it hard to get, as she is to at certain points when Christy is to call Alan, like she's mentioning it's like, well, yeah, I like older boys, and I already have this other guy that I'm with, and Alan is just like, oh well, like I'm sure anybody or any guy would be lucky to have you, kind of thing, and then eventually the Commandos end up using that against him later on in the later half of the film. But I'm getting ahead of myself. But it's just kind of funny to just kind of see how like Christy eventually is to come into being Alan's kind of girl by the end of this tale, because she is to really need saving from Alan, but then also sometimes they're to very much work well together. But anyways, getting ahead of myself. So while Christy and Alan are kind of making their way through this toy store, we'd have Timmy who stumbles across the back room of this store and is to realize both Chip and Archer are fighting out themselves. And that immediately rushes to have Timmy to tell Chrissy, it's like, hey, I want this action figure. I want this. I want. So they go back to the back room, and all of the action figures are to go on and, like, seemingly not showcase that they are to be alive, be able to do these things, because like it always takes a while in all these kinds of things when the toy comes alive to eventually show proof to all these people that legitimately these things are to really be alive. And never knew why exactly like they had that idea to always have it be like a slow build. Like I think it's just kind of a movie thing to just kind of just milk time. But again, um like I guess it is to really just be like you questioning whether or not that these things are to eventually be alive, to them having performing all these other tasks later on. So it's like the slow burn. So Christie is to like look at the pricing of these possible action figures, just be like, yeah, I don't think that Timmy's gonna go on and get these. But so eventually Christie is to talk to Alan, and later on go into the toy store and want to buy these action figures, but the toy store will be closed at that moment. But we'll get there. So Alan is to go on and realize that his dad, Stuart, is to have forgotten his ticket for his flight. So Alan is to bike off to get to his father just in the nick of time before he ends up leaving for the day. And we'd come to find that Stuart and his wife are kind of heckling their neighbor Phil for wanting to go on and chop off this tree branch just to have a better satellite signal. And we'll come to find that even the satellite thing comes into play in the later half of the movie, weirdly enough. So Alan goes on and is to give his father this ticket, but of course the dad is like, well, hey, shouldn't you be at the store? And Alan's like, well, yeah, but like, hey, like, I'm giving you a hand here. Like, you should not go on and lecture me. But so Alan eventually goes back into the store to realize that the store has gone on to eventually break down into chaos. He is to realize that the store is in shambles, and it seems that every single one of the Commandos action figures, as well as eventually the Gorgonites, are to go on and seemingly be missing. And eventually is to kind of look throughout the store and realize how chaotic it is. So Alan is to be forced to close down the store and is to try to clean up as much as he can. And that is to be, of course, when Christy rolls up and is looking for the action figures. And Alan is just like, yeah. Like, you know what? I don't know what I can really give you right now, but it seems that Alan is to go on and kind of be cleaning up with Christy. And then Stewart comes back to the store and is, of course, furious with certain things that have kind of gone on to eventually break while he had gone on to be away, and that wants Stewart to just kind of forcibly take over the store and kind of leave Alan to go on and kind of leave with Christy kind of giving him some of the action figures. So we'd have Alan, who is to go on and take Archer and put him in his backpack. And the Commandos are to, of course, be so desperate to want to go and attack the Gorgonite, the Archer character, that they're trying to go on and get him even here. So we'd have one of our characters who is to be Bazooka, who individually tries to go on and gets or tries to get to Archer as close as he can. But then the further and further he tries to get to Archer, we'd come to find that Bazooka is to have at some point just kind of fallen into the cracks of things and needs to bust his legs, and we'd have him desperately pleading to his other commandos to kind of pick him up and kind of put him back together. So Archer is taken home by Alan, and at some point when Alan is to like realize he's kind of thrusted in doing homework instead of manning a toy store, Alan is still kind of fixed on this Archer character to just kind of see like all it entails. So he's just kind of playing around with it. He starts talking to it, and we'd all of a sudden have where the Archer character is kind of introducing itself and then asking like what Alan's name is, and Alan goes on to be like, well, yeah, my name is Alan. Shut up and shut up now because I'm trying to do my homework. And of course, Archer is to go on and be like, oh, Alan, shut up. And so Alan, of course, is to just be like, man, like you got my name wrong. It's just Alan. And eventually, we'd have Alan who's to tell the Archer character, it's like, no, like my name is just plain Alan. Like, how can you not go on and get that right? Because I feel or I know that you're like a lot smarter than you're really playing off here. So again, we would have Alan who's gonna go on and have a phone call eventually with Christy here, and that's while also the like commandos are kind of listening in on this whole conversation, and they're more and more starting to realize that they can kind of use Christy against Alan to get to the Gorgonites. So we'd go on to have the Commandos Elite that are to eventually go to Christie, but then also at certain points try and attack Alan. Alan at some point is to go on and just kind of be with the Gorgonite characters, and then ends up seeing one of the Nitro commandos, whose name is Nick Nitro, is to go on and slice into Nick just because it seems like he's befriending the Gorgonite character. So we would take Alan to grab the Nick Nitro, toss it into the sink, and have it just grind up this character's legs to have it be that, again, this is another situation where the parents are looking into Alan and he has kind of hurt his hand. It's like, what the heck is going on? How did this all play out? And Alan isn't really telling them the absolute truth. So Nick Nitro, who had gone on to have lost seemingly his legs, and like it seems that he's to have been dead, but then the prior character Bazooka is seemingly fine. They just reassembled him back together. Not quite sure the whole real connection of like how is it that this character was alive. I guess it's just convenient for story. But so since Nitro had gone on to die, we then have our characters realize that they had like the chip of this character, and they could turn around and use these Barbie dolls that Christie is to go on and have as a way to be foot soldiers to get to Christie to kind of tie her up here and kind of be a real decent menacing threat. So we'd have this kind of Frankensteinish like experiment going on with all of these Barbie dolls that it seems that Christie is to go on and have, or her home is to have just a collection of. So by the time Christie is to seemingly come home here with her boyfriend, we would then have Christie, who is to kind of just be mauled by all these Barbie dolls. Like they're to go on and kind of in a very kind of Gulliver's Travels like way, they're to kind of take this rope and rope her and trip her and eventually climb up on top of her. And eventually, while Christie is screaming, we would have her seemingly boyfriend that is to come in to rescue her, to eventually realize that these Barbie dolls are also kind of becoming too much for even him to handle. And so he ends up, of course, getting seemingly dismantled by these Barbies as well. So we would eventually have Alan, who is to eventually want to figure out where exactly all the Gorgonites are. And come to find out, like, the speciality of the Gorgonites is that they are to really just be hiding. They hide and they lose. Like, that's all that they really have in their arsenal, come to find out. And we'd be forced to have our characters just be like, well, no, like, we have intelligence in our computer chips. Like, we need to learn beyond just our skill set. We need to go on and adapt, or we're going to die here. But so Alan eventually is to try and figure out where possibly the rest of the Gorgonites are, and he comes to find out that all of them are just hiding in this dumpster. And so he goes on to just kind of start looking into it, and we'd have characters like Ocula who kind of pop their one eye out, and eventually we start to realize that all the rest of the Gorgonites are present in there, even the one character who is to eventually be uh, Frankenstein, who they had to go on and rebuild back together as this kind of hodgepodging of radio parts and collective things just all together to just kind of keep this character alive. Because during the chaos of the battle in the toy store and Alan kind of looking around, we would see that the Frankenstein character seemed to have been dead, but they had gone on to figure out a way to revive that character. So Alan is to go on and take all these characters to his home, and we would have the Oculus that is going on and getting far too close to the TV as our characters are starting to go on and watch it. And we would want Alan to grab this Ocula character, just like, hey man, you're gonna ruin your eye if you're gonna go on and get closer and closer to the TV. But so the Oculi, or the Ocula gets closer and closer to the TV regardless. So all of a sudden we would have this VHS tape, man, what a throwback, come flying into Alan's place, and we would come to find out that like this is to be a message from Christy that is to have the commandos in the background kind of telling her what to say, or like telling her to cry or scream or whatever, to make a real good message sent to Alan. And so we have Christy who is starting to like state this message, but we realize that this is not really like what she wants to go on and say, and there's no real duress of her saying any of this, but really we'd find out that that's a real true lie, as she stated herself. So Christy then goes on to eventually like state this message that like help me, Obi-Wan, you're my only hope, kind of thing. And so Alan is to of course be like, well yeah, like I'm gonna help out this girl because I'm looking at her as just this like future, like pining away, like oh if only kind of girl. So Alan goes on to make his way to this uh like this place. So Alan is to have to be forced to supposedly deliver the Gorgonites to the commandos. So we'd come to find that like Alan is delivering this box that has the word Gorgonites on it, which I'm like, well, what else would it have been? And Alan makes his way to Christie. So we'd of course come to find both Christie and Alan, now the two of them together, are seemingly more of a match to these Barbied-esque-like characters. And the commandos are making their way to this Gorgonite box, which is really just to be some tape recording thing. And they're to be had, like, oh my god, it's just a decoy. So we'd force our characters to then, like, battle it out and make their way through all of these threats and these things and all of these figures of sorts. So to eventually push them on to finally having to come to a moment where they are to need to be forced to go to their parents and tell them the absolute truth, or like, oh hey man, like this is what's really going on, and like this threat is to be really just at your doorstep at this point. And here's where we start to get like the action figure developers who are kind of coming in to eventually talk to the guy who had developed said chip, who is to have been this kind of clear room technician, and he had gone on to state to the two developers that he's like, well, yeah, like, um, this chip is to be a chip that eventually is to deal with intelligence, is to eventually grow and strategize. And the military didn't see me putting an intelligent uh, chip into a weapon is to have been a great strategy. So they decided to scrap the whole thing. But you guys were to have gone on and gotten this chip, and uh, how well did it do for you? And so the developers who had gotten a call from Alan earlier on, stating that these action figures had destroyed his toy store, as he was to have at first tried and called this one actual woman who was to answer this phone, and he couldn't get anywhere with her, and so he's like, just put me on a machine. So Ern was to eventually gotten that message and was to look further into the chips and then realize, like, oh my god, like, we didn't know what we were getting into, so let's go on and let's backpedal here, find Alan, and like figure out like what is to have really happened with these toys, because like we want to do just more than like recall these and find them defective and just try to get them back as quickly as possible. No, we're gonna take the extra mile and just kind of legitimately just kind of see what was to have all happened within these with these toys. So Irwin and Larry like hit this hit this front door at like the perfect timing to be tied with the rest of these family characters. So we would come across the Commando Elite, who are to have gone on and stolen a number of Stewart's uh, tools and devices and things to have kind of worked on any number of his toys. Hence, when Stewart is to kind of go into his workshop and try to work on this boat, he doesn't have the pieces there. He doesn't have the tools there. So, and Stewart kind of turns to Alan and is to eventually question that, because Alan is to have had a very dark past, it seems that we are to find in this film, where he is to have had a past of kind of graffiti and a number of other things that was to have gotten him in trouble, to where now when he is to have a real problem here, like, we would have a lot of people question it, or boy who cried wolf kind of situation, because really like the trust isn't really there until it's right in their face. So, and plus he's a kid, like no one goes on and really believes a kid. So the Commandos make their way to this home, want to go on and just fire off all of these nail gun-ish like things and fire all these fireballish like cannons. So we then have people who are starting to like, okay, like, let's take cover here, like, let's figure out our strategy here, like, let's figure out how we can go on and face off against these things. And so we have like people kind of taking like pieces of furniture and tables and whatever, kind of putting them against the windows and trying to figure out a way to kind of bunker down here. We really start to have Alan's mother, who's Irene, who's like really like kind of bursting out into like kind of soldier mode, and is kind of telling everybody where to go and what to do. And like her herself is starting to go on and like starting to figure out a way to like counter the things that are kind of going on with these attacks. Like when they're shooting these kind of fireballs out onto them, like Irene is taking this racket and just kind of counter smacking it back out to all of these action figures to kind of hope that they are to at some point just start to burn up. And we would have Stewart who's just like, yeah, Irene, all right. Like, and we'd have Stewart who's like, hey, like we have to come up with some kind of strategy against these action figures. Because at some point, like my wife is going to get tennis elbow from going up against all of these threats. And that would then lead both uh, Irwin and Larry, who are to realize from the uh, the clean room technician character that it seems to really be that the only way to really take all of these action figures down is from a EMP burst, electromagnetic pulse. And really that goes on, it makes me very much realizing that like Gremlins might have gone on and gotten taken out a similar way to where I think specifically uh like they had the whole thing of like don't get them wet, but then like we would have like all the gremlins ending up in this water, and then they end up getting electrified and that kind of just kills them off and kind of neutralizes them. But so this movie in a lot of ways is just kind of paced in the same familiar way of Gremlins. But so they're like, well, hey, like, but how can we figure out how to really establish an EMP? Like, this probably is to not have us be able to just buy a nuclear weapon off an eBay or an Amazon. I'm getting into the weeds here, but that's kind of similar to what they say. So they realize that they can kind of look at the transformer, the little pole that is to have been placed by their home, and they are to rationalize like, well, yeah, like all we need to do is just kind of adjust this transformer, and it eventually can send a kind of a shockwave or an EMP like out to probably take out everybody's power, but then also is to like take out these action figures. So really that is to just have us figure out or confirm who is going to be the chosen one to go into this transformer, climb up to it, and adjust this thing to force this EMP burst. And that, of course, is to be left to the main character, obviously, who is Alan. We'd have a moment between Alan and Stewart where Stewart's like, well, no, I'm going to be the one. And Alan's like, no, 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 like, it has to be me. And Stewart's like, okay, uh, like I trust you. You go ahead and you go do it. So Alan goes on and starts to climb up into the transformer, and here's when the Gorgonites start to change from like being defenseless to kind of like looking all together at one another. And Archer is to kind of tell his team, it's like, hey man, like we're hiders and we're losers and we can't do that anymore. We gotta fight. We gotta come in. We gotta help these people. Like it's wrong for us to just kind of stay here idle and not do anything. So we would have Alan, who's at the transformer, and Chip gets in the way, and so Archer is kind of coming flying in, and we'd have characters that are to be Inseniac, who is to kind of do his little Tasmanian devil kind of twist and turn to get this kind of rope to go fast up into having Archer kind of make his way to the transformer to get to Chip. So while Alan had tried to kind of face off against Chip, and then he drops this pipe, we then have forcibly both Chip and Archer who are kind of fighting while Alan is just kind of holding on here. And so the two of them are kind of facing off while Alan is just kind of dangling here. And then Alan goes on to grab Chip, chuck him into this transformer, and is to just send shockwaves through this neighborhood once this EMP kicks off, as both Irwin and Larry are in the house just kind of putting the pieces together to the breaker system to try and figure out how this can best work. And Larry turns to Irwin and is like, do you think this can even work? And Irwin's like, yeah. So the impulse we are to magically assume is to have all worked, and we would, of course, I think I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, because there's a whole nother run where we'd have Chip who needs to go and get like reinforcements, and he goes all the way to this store. But I think this kind of happens. We'll get to that. So Chip is electrified. Most of the soldiers are all taken out at this point, and we're assuming or assessing that all of this had been won this day, as the other soldiers that kind of burst into flame here, and we're thinking all is for done, all is for won and whatever. And we'd come to find that Chip is to make his way to this toy store because he's still alive and kicking, and he comes back with all these reinforcements, all these doppelgangers of himself, and all of these other soldiers to replace the ones that he had lost, and coming off to threaten these people again. But that is, of course, when they go on to do the full-on EMP wipe seemingly all of the soldiers out, to have the Gorgonites who are to be underneath the satellite dish the whole entire time. And Alan, who is to kind of look under the satellite dish, noticed the Gorgonites, and he's like, oh, please tell me that you guys are still alive, and luckily they are. And so we'd have Mars, the company owner of Globotech, who comes in and is immediately having his assistant just starting to just chuck out checks like nobody's business. Because we'd have Mars who's telling Joe, it's like, yeah, maybe we shouldn't have a big fat logo of our brand all over this situation. And Joe is like, well, yeah, but my back, but my crack, my arm, my like my body just doesn't feel quite right. I don't think I can just deliver or move this truck. And then Mars just whips out this big check coming from Mrs. Kegel, and he's like, oh, okay, I'll get you moving right away. And we'd start having all these characters, and here's kind of the running joke starting to go on, and just be like, hey, sir, like, you were the guy who owned these toys, and like all the chaos that had happened, my house is now ruined, this and that. Like, how are you going to pay for all this? Ooh, nice check. Ooh, this is nice. All right. Like, I didn't think you could come up with that kind of number to just pay me off, but man, you can. So the further and further we get here, the more Mars is just like, well, hey, like, I don't think that this is an entire loss. We could probably take all these toys and take them like overseas and have them be a pretty good threat to Saudi Arabia or some other kind of third world country here. And so Mars is to just kind of go on and like realize like, all right, well, like, hey, like, man, did like my toys run rampant. So it is kind of funny that like we'd have Gremlins that doesn't play out the same way. Like we'd have the guy who bought the Gremlin from uh the antique store owner from that movie. Like you would have thought like that guy would have came back and just like, hey man, like clunk, like here's these Gremlins. Like you didn't tell me that they were gonna be this chaotic and whatever. It's like, well, hey, I gave you the three rules. You should have followed them to a T, but you didn't. But so we'd have Alan that is to be with the Gorgonites, letting them set sail on this ship by the end of this, because the Gorgonites still want to go on and find out where Gorgon really is, or their homeland. And Alan's like, you know that this place probably really isn't a real place, and they're just like, well, like we still have to find our home, we still have to find our path, probably leading them to another sequel if this would have done well, and we could have just had other actors play all of these different characters, and more than likely that's what they're kind of pitching to. But yeah, so eventually Alan is to be, by the end of this film, locking lips with Christy, just smooching it out to really just cement that it's like, okay, yeah, like they had spent so much time saving one another, and Alan has just kind of been looking at Christy, just like, yeah, like I like how I like how she's fighting against those Barbies. Yeah. So eventually, all this to be all happy ending and all good times, noodle salads and whichever, uh, which is to eventually uh, lead us into a ending of review. So with that said, I think I'm gonna go on and get out of here. More than likely, there was a number of things that I probably had forgotten about while going on here. There was at one point where Archer was to be thumbing through the internet and was kind of looking at like presidents and all these uh, kind of things like wars and number of other, just to kind of understand this world. And like that really comes off like kind of like in Fifth Element, where like Mila's character is going on and kind of researching like war and certain uh, historical events and everything along those lines. But yeah, so really, other than that, I think I feel that I got a good gist of most of the movie, but like I don't feel that it probably like did scene for scene or whatever. But I think it's just clearly good enough in my eyes. I don't think I could have gone on and done anything better. I really probably couldn't. Or there were certain times where I was just like, am I gonna remember all of this? Um, because it was an hour and 40 some odd minutes. Um, but yeah, but this movie was a lot of fun. I liked it. I enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below how you felt about Small Soldiers. If you like this movie, if you are to really think that it is kind of a timeless classic, or it really is to just be a thing that is like, man, like this movie was X number of years ago and it really doesn't hold up. Really, if you were to have really watched this whole entire video, I really do appreciate it. But either way, I think it's about that time to say goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, everybody.